Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. Very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show this morning. An inspiration to the end, tributes to the cancer campaigner Dame Deborah James, who has died at the age of 40. We'll be looking back at her life and asking how you can spot signs of bowel cancer early on. Also on today's show, with the Prime Minister calling to dig deep to prepare for a dangerous decade following Russia's invasion of Ukraine, is enough being done and spent on defence capability in the UK? We'll ask the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, and we'll also talk to Labour's Lisa Nandy coming up. It's Wednesday, the 29th of June. Take risks, love deeply, have no regrets. Dame Deborah James' family revealed the cancer campaigner's final words after her death at the age of 40. Missiles strike Ukraine's president releases a video showing the moment a shopping centre is hit. Proof, he says, of Russia targeting civilians.
I'm live outside the shopping centre in Kremenchuk, where the recovery operation is still underway.
I'm live in Madrid, where Boris Johnson will be urging allies to spend more on defence, and Finland and Sweden look poised to join the NATO alliance.
I'm the president, take me to the Capitol. The bombshell testimony from a former White House aide around President Trump's actions on the day of the Capitol riots.
The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel.
Socialite to sex trafficker Ghislaine Maxwell is sentenced to 20 years in prison with this message to her victims: I hope my harsh incarceration brings you closure.
Ghislaine must die in prison because I've been in hell and back for the last 17 years.
Also coming up on the programme for you this morning, wherever you're watching us around the world. Taking it to the Supreme Court, Nicola Sturgeon proposes a date next year for a new Scottish independence referendum. We'll speak to the First Minister just after 8 o'clock. And America regulating a woman's body more than it regulates guns. Or you can't expect decency from those who never had it in the first place. A fascinating debate to bring you on the US abortion ruling at 7:30. Morning, everybody. She was an inspiration to the end, who single-handedly raised millions of pounds for cancer research. The campaigner, Dame Deborah James, has died at the age of just 40. In a statement on her Instagram page, her family shared Dame Deborah's final thoughts. She said, "Find a life worth enjoying, take risks, love deeply, have no regrets, and always, always have rebellious hope. And finally, check your poo. It could just save your life." Adele Robinson has more.
Deborah James won the hearts of the country, dancing through her cancer treatment with humour and candour. Even in her final days, she raised millions for cancer charities. The consultant who cared for her called her achievements unparalleled.
I'll remember as somebody who gave incredible hope to many, many people in this country.
I can't go out. I'm sick.
Deborah James used her social media platform, Bowel Babe, to break the taboos of cancer. Her podcast, You, Me and the Big C, propelled the deputy head teacher to fame. Her final episode was recorded after she'd begun end-of-life care.
I feel like I've been, playing with the devil, and I think, when you think, oh no, it's caught up with me now, and I haven't really got my head around this.
Her podcast producer Mike Holt spoke of his love for Deborah.
My phone will ring any time of the day, and when I look down and I see it's Deborah, I'll think, wow, what's this going to be next? What's the next idea, Debs? And I'll miss that.
It was obviously never my intention to kind of die before it was released, which I'm really gutted by.
Even in her last few weeks, she didn't stop, raising over £1 million through the launch and sale of her fashion line.
Basically, from now until I die.
Deborah announced her second book, one she won't now see published, and celebrated what she described as perfect moments with her family.
I'm too sexy for my shirt.
Deborah often dressed up to spread the word for people to get checked for bowel cancer. That remains her overriding message. Deborah James didn't waste a moment of her 40 years. Her relentless campaigning will undoubtedly save the lives of others. Awarded a damehood in her final weeks, a show of appreciation from a nation who loved her.
I suppose that's it from me. I can't believe it. That is it from me. Enjoy life because it is so precious. It's all I want right now is more time and more life. And oh, and also check your poo.
Adele Robinson, Sky News.
You can go to her fundraising page if you'd like to get involved in raising money to try to help others defeat cancer. Bowel Babe Fund for Cancer Research UK, presently standing at just less than £7 million. And we'll have more tributes to Dame Deborah later in the programme, as well as ways to spot bowel cancer. Other news, we've been talking about Ukraine with the, we will certainly be talking to him about it, the Defence Secretary, just looking for him at the moment. I'm sure he's around somewhere. Before that, let's bring in the International Affairs Editor here at Sky, Dominic Waghorn. He's in Madrid, and Sally Lockwood, who is standing by in Ukraine for us. Sally, I wonder if we could go to you first. We were chatting to you yesterday. You just arrived after the attack on this shopping centre. What's it looking like there this morning? Good morning.
Morning to UK. Yeah, it became clear very soon after arriving yesterday they weren't going to find any more survivors in this burnt-out wreckage that I'll give you a look at behind me. And certainly that has been confirmed now by authorities that they are no longer looking for survivors. This is a recovery operation. 18 people have been confirmed to have died so far in this attack. But there are still many, many missing. Some have been found in hospital. There were 40 people reported missing initially. Some of those have been found in hospital, but certainly more than half remain missing. So it is feared that the death toll will grow. Human remains have been recovered from the site, and relatives who are looking for their loved ones are giving their DNA to a local police station in the hope of getting some news and some answers as to what happened. But away from this very grim recovery operation now is also a war crimes investigation. There were investigators down here yesterday, a large number of them. And certainly evidence has emerged to show that there was a missile strike on this shopping centre, something Russia denies. And in his overnight address, President Zelensky actually released CCTV footage himself, very dramatic images to show a missile hitting this shopping centre in Kremenchuk, this industrial town in the heart of Ukraine. So certainly prosecutors and investigators will be poring over this evidence now to try and work out whether this was a deliberate hit, something that President Zelensky says it was. But aside from whether they managed to prove if Russia intentionally targeted this shopping centre, what it doesn't change is the fact that attacks on civilian areas like this continue to happen, and Ukrainian people continue to feel at risk countrywide here. These missile strikes are across the country, not just in the eastern Donbass region or on the capital Kyiv, as we saw earlier in the week. And one other thing I should say to UK is that they're also investigating the fact that during the air raid siren here, shortly before that attack, people didn't evacuate the building. And certainly I think after 4 months of war, people have become a little bit more relaxed here when it comes to these air raid sirens, which go off in every city almost every day. But certainly that mood is changing. Civilians across the country are feeling much more threatened.
OK. Thanks very much indeed, Sally. Meantime, Dominic, what's happening in Madrid today? Update us.
Well, OK, we're looking at arguably the most important NATO summit since the end of the Cold War, certainly going to be ushering the most sweeping radical changes to the alliance since the end of the Cold War. They'll be unveiling the strategic concept. Now, that's the way NATO plans and prepares for threats, and it hasn't produced one of those for at least a decade. So it's a complete update and overhaul of that, and particularly in the light of the Russian threat. The principle behind the operations they've been working under for the last decade or so is a tripwire principle. The idea that you have small numbers of forces on Russia's border in those Baltic nations, and their very presence would deter Russia from invading, knowing that if they invaded those countries and attacked those forces, the whole of NATO would pile in and defend them. Well, those Baltic nations have felt pretty worried by what Russia has done in Ukraine, so they're going to massively increase the number of troops in the east of Europe, but also increase the rapid response force from 40,000 to 300,000. All of that is going to cost a lot of money, and we're going to be hearing from the Prime Minister urging his allies to spend more money. Britain spends 2% of its GDP at least on defence. He wants to see his allies spending that or at least more than that. So I think you'll be able to ask the Defence Secretary, Ben Wallace, when you find him, exactly how much money Britain should be spending, because we're getting a sense there's a bit of a difference of opinion between him, certainly Rishi Sunak in the Treasury, and possibly the Prime Minister as well.
Pleased to say that Mr Wallace is with us now, so I must bid you both farewell. Thank you very much indeed. Thanks a lot. Defence Secretary joining us live from Madrid. Hello to you, Defence Secretary. Thanks for joining us. Heard there from Dominic Waghorn just how important this meeting is of NATO today. Just want to remind our viewers what you said, the government said as part of their manifesto pledge, this to increase the defence budget each year by 0.5% above inflation. Will the government be abiding by that pledge?
Well, I think a number 10 spokesman said yesterday that they thought that was unlikely given the significant changes to inflation. As Defence Secretary, my most important target is remaining above 2%, if not greater, of GDP, which is the main NATO benchmark. And, you know, I think that's really important that we continue to commit to that, if not greater. And I think that's what we're all here to discuss today in Madrid.
2% enough?
Well, we're currently above 2%. For this spending period, that's the 4 years of spending settlement I got from the Treasury, we are on target to meet our 2%. And we're also on target in other areas with our sort of defence reforms. The question is really the next spending period, the middle of the decade. We were prepared to take certain vulnerabilities on board in the middle of the decade as we got rid of some equipment and re-equipped with new. I think the invasion of Russia into Ukraine has changed that. And that's why I think the discussions are so important for the sort of middle of the decade funding. So between now and my comprehensive spending review settlement, which ends in 2024, the here and now, we are rightly set. We've got £24 billion of record settlement. The question is what happens in the middle of the decade and the future if security and threat becomes more of an issue.
Is 2.14% enough?
I'm a Defence Secretary of the Department. All departmental heads, Kay, will say they want more money. Of course, in the here and now, absolutely, we have enough money. We have enough money for next year as well. You know, what you discover in government, in different departments is despite getting sums, you've got to then spend them properly. And I've been determined to make sure we are spending our money and getting it out the door. I think what you'll see across a whole range of government departments is that despite settlement, it's often quite hard you can't immediately start building a hospital or immediately start building roads. And that's no different for defence. So look, for the here and now and for that comprehensive spending review settlement, we are absolutely in the right place. Post-2024 is really the discussions I have with the Chancellor and the Prime Minister that I feel, and I said in a speech yesterday, that, the security of this country is vital. The work the men and women of our armed forces do is incredibly important. We've all basked in their success in helping with COVID, with Afghanistan not pitting, and now leading from the front on Ukraine. And I think that means that Britain wants to maintain its leadership role post-2024. We're going to have to see probably greater investment. We've spent 40 years nearly taking a peace dividend out of the end of the Cold War. Sometimes it's important to invest. The Prime Minister changed that direction of travel, which was excellent news back in 2020 when he did the settlement, gave me the record funding. That was a change of what had happened for decades previously, where people took money out of defence every time. So we need to continue that direction of investment. And if we do, I think we'll be able to give an armed forces that continues to help us lead around the world.
OK, you're telling my viewers that for now we're in the right place. Yesterday, you said for too long, defence has lived on a diet of smoke and mirrors, hollowed out formations and fantasy efficiency savings.
Yeah, and that's why the Prime Minister changed that direction with My Settlement 2020. The £24 billion, a net increase in defence spending, the biggest since the Cold War, was exactly to answer that point. So it actually says that in the full speech, Kay. If you read further into the speech, you'll see me say that. That's why the Prime Minister reversed decades of direction of travel on defence. The key for me as Defence Secretary is to make sure that government's appetite for using its defence forces is matched by its resources puts in place. I can deliver an armed forces to keep Britain safe. I can deliver an armed forces to be able to support our allies in the world and stand up for our values. But that obviously has to be cut to our cloth, and I think that's really important that we always make sure we do it. In the past, in history, prime ministers around have often volunteered defence to do all sorts of things and never then funded it. This prime minister has done that, but I'm just really keen that we recognise that My Settlement was done before Russia invaded Ukraine. Russia is very, very dangerous now on the world stage. The world is less secure than it was 2-3 years ago and is not looking likely to change for the rest of the decade. I think that's an important moment in the middle of the decade to say we should commit to increased funding.
OK, I read in my weekend papers that you wrote to the Prime Minister asking for a 20% hike in military spending. Was that the case?
No.
How much would you like?
Well, how long's a piece of string? Look, I can see opportunities all over the world, Kay, to put the front foot forward of the British forces. Again, that goes back to my earlier point about the appetite of the government and how much it wants to do. Of course, I want always enough to meet the threat. My duty to you, to the citizens of the UK, and indeed to the country and our allies, is to provide the government with a defence force capable enough to defend against the threats. If the threat changes, then we should always consider that type of investment to match it. We do that in many other departments around government. When the NHS comes under winter pressures for decades and decades, chancellors of the day have stepped up and invested to meet that response. Obviously, winter pressures in the army are slightly different. They take place over 5-6 years. But nevertheless, if the threat changes, we should always be open to increasing that funding. I've said that a number of occasions before. That's the right way to do it because I'm a threat-led organisation. And for now, between now and 2024, we are in the right place. The question becomes next, what happens next?
OK. As Defence Secretary, are you completely content that as a country we spend apparently proportionally less than Greece, Lithuania and Estonia?
Well, I think, look, we are actually the second biggest spender at the moment in Europe. We are also, I think, the third biggest spender in the world in defence. So we spend a lot of money, if you talk about in cash terms, on defence. Obviously, Britain's GDP, or Britain's economy is far bigger than some of those countries you've just listed. And therefore, if you spend even a baseline of defence that comes close to 1% or 2% that would be comparable to us, you'll discover that, some of those countries, that higher percentage reflects the fact their economy is much smaller. But overall, we have been the leader. I'm determined that we stay the leader in the pack of that defence spend. And that's why I'm keen that we address the sort of post-2024 period.
What's the point of having a manifesto pledge like 0.5% above inflation spending on the defence budget, or saying that 300,000 new homes per year are going to be built by the mid-2020s, or saying that 0.70% of GDP will be spent on foreign aid, or that we're going to get full fibre broadband around the country by 2025? Point of a manifesto if you don't keep your promises?
Well, first of all, I've been in politics long enough, Kate, to have seen every government not fulfil 100% its manifesto.
What's the point then? What's the point of a manifesto if you're not going to keep your promise?
Manifesto is an offer to the public, Kay. It's saying what we are going to try and deliver as a government. It is, you can call it a promise. We promise to try and do these things, but some things.
So it's more of a wish list than a promise.
Right. Okay. Look, do I think the manifesto we have today would look the same if it had been written post-COVID or during COVID? I think it would have been different. And I think COVID was a once in a 100-year, once in a 100-year plus type issue. And also we have an economic issue, that means we have to. I mean, a responsible government would take difficult decisions in light of the facts changing. I've just been saying to UK about threat. If threat changes, we should change our investments in defence with it. It is a perfectly legitimate position to be in. And I think if the economic situation has changed or things are harder to deliver than people thought, and remember, to be fair, it's not always as straightforward. There are always other factors that affect us. These things sometimes take longer than we would have liked. But you know, it doesn't mean to say it's not an aspiration. You know, under this government, the Prime Minister did absolutely change the defence investment. He did something that hadn't been done for decades. And, you know, if inflation hadn't lifted off basically this year, we would be on track to meet our 0.5%.
Okay. Talk to me quickly about something that's also quite close to your heart, and that's Scotland, of course. We're hearing from Nicola Sturgeon. She said, I've had enough of the UK government and we're going to have a referendum one way or another on independence. What would you say in response to her?
I went into the Scottish politics, Scottish Parliament with Nicola Sturgeon. Nicola Sturgeon's had enough of Westminster since 1999 when I went into the Scottish Parliament with her. The problem is she's had enough of that, but she hasn't actually done her job of delivering for the people of Scotland better healthcare, better schools, better crime rates, better education, and all the things that are really important to the people of Scotland. And instead, she's desperate, I think, now to have a second referendum, even though all the promises were a referendum is a once in a generation. Well, there was a referendum. It was all pretty much handed over to the Scottish Parliament to decide on everything from its wording to its timing. They had the referendum. They lost the referendum. And instead of then saying, OK, hands up, let's try and see if there's a better way. Let's try and better the people of Scotland's experience with public services. She's just banged on the same one-trick pony. I think the problem for Nicola is time is running out. And, you know, I think she knows, because for all the sort of spin she put on separation, she knows that every day that goes past, every day further away from her sort of referendum zeal or the division that she stoked up the first time round, people are feeling that belonging to the United Kingdom is probably a better option. And the reason they want to belong to the United Kingdom is, if you look at COVID, the scale of support to Scotland could only have been delivered by a greater political union. If you look at defence, you've got President Putin taking nuclear on numerous occasions. And, you know, people in Scotland realise that we are greater together, better together as a nation.
OK, you've definitely had your three-shredded week this morning. I can't get a word in edgeways. Just one final question before I let you go. Pressure on the PM. Harriet Harman, chair of the Privileges Committee, new chair of the Privileges Committee, that will be looking into Partygate and the Prime Minister. Any concerns about her appointment?
No, it's a matter for Parliament. You know, I leave it to the parliamentary arithmetic, the people on the panel. You know, those committees are deliberately set up so that we have an opposition member chairing that panel. That's how governments and standards should be held to account. We often do that on a range of different select committees. But I think the reality is yes, of course, she's the chair. I'm sure all the MPs on there will look at the facts and take their own decision.
Good to talk to you. Thanks for joining us.
Okay, so I was late. Thank you.
Thank you. Time now for a look at this morning's newspapers for you. The Financial Times leads with testimony from the January 6th Insurrection Committee hearing in Washington, where it was alleged that former President Donald Trump attempted to join the armed mob storming the Capitol, even going so far as trying to grab the steering wheel of his limousine. Reporting on the sentencing in the Maxwell case, the Metro has the headline, Ghislaine caged for 20 years. The Sun carries tributes to the podcaster and cancer awareness campaigner Dame Deborah James, whose death at the age of 40 was announced last night. Times reports on the Metropolitan Police being placed in special measures after a series of institutional failings, including its handling of the Sarah Everard case. And the Telegraph hears that Boris Johnson is involved in an ongoing disagreement with the Defence Secretary and the head of the Army, who want to increase military spending. Still to come on the programme for you this morning. We'll speak to the British Medical Association after GPs at the BMA announced annual conference voted in favour of industrial action over new working contracts. Just after 8, we'll speak to the Shadow Levelling Up Secretary Lisa Nandy as Labour calls on the government to get a grip over rising cost pressures on vital public services. And we'll speak to the First Minister of Scotland, Nicola Sturgeon, to reply to what we heard there from the Defence Secretary after she set out her vision for a second Scottish independence referendum. President Donald Trump knew protesters were armed but still encouraged them to march on the Capitol. This, the extraordinary testimony from the committee investigating the January 6th riots. Here's Mark Stone.
Cassidy Hutchinson was at the heart of the Trump White House, the principal aide to Donald Trump's chief of staff.
The witness will please stand and raise her right hand.
The hearing was unscheduled and the speculation over what she might say, huge.
The president was extremely angry at the Attorney General's AP interview and had thrown his lunch against the wall.
You can see a map of the first floor of the West Wing.
From the perspective of an insider with a desk just yards from the Oval Office, she described a volatile president in the days around the storming of the US Capitol. That morning, on January the 6th, 2021, Mr. Trump prepared to address his supporters. He was told some in the crowd were armed, but didn't care and wanted the magnetic security screens to be removed.
I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in. They can march to the Capitol from here.
Pre-recorded and live testimony as the committee seeks to prove that the former president knew an armed mob was bent on violence and to prove that all this was the culmination of his plan to overturn the election result. Listen to this about the moment the Secret Service deemed it too dangerous for the president to go to the Capitol.
The president said something to the effect of, I'm the effing president, take me up to the Capitol now. To which Bobby responded, sir, we have to go back to the West Wing. The president reached up towards the front of the vehicle to grab at the steering wheel. Mr. Engel grabbed his arm, said, sir, you need to take your hand off the steering wheel. We're going back to the West Wing. We're not going to the Capitol. Mr. Trump then used his free hand to lunge towards Bobby Engel.
Up at the Capitol, they were calling for the vice president to be hanged. He had defied Trump and recognized Joe Biden as president. Now we know the conversations in the West Wing.
I remember Pat saying something to the effect of, Mark, we need to do something more. They're literally calling for the vice president to be effing hung. And Mark had responded something to the effect of, you heard him, Pat. He thinks Mike deserves it. He doesn't think they're doing anything wrong.
As Ms. Hutchinson left, the committee vice chair, Republican Liz Cheney, said the case for prosecuting Donald Trump just got much stronger. Mark Stone, Sky News in Washington.
We're looking at some of today's other headlines for you now. 29-year-old Jordan McSweeney has been charged with the murder of 35-year-old Zara Alina in Ilford in East London. The Met Police say he's also been charged with attempted rape and robbery. He'll appear in court today. Ms. Alini was found with head injuries in the early hours of Sunday. She died in hospital later that morning. The Metropolitan Police has been placed under special measures by the police watchdog after it raised substantial and persistent concerns about the force's performance. It means the Met must now develop an improvement plan to address problems. Travis Barker has been taken to hospital in California. The Blink-182 drummer was pictured on a stretcher outside a medical centre in Los Angeles with his wife Kourtney Kardashian by his side. His condition is not yet known. Michael Vaughan has decided to step back from his commentary work with the BBC for the time being. The former England captain was dropped from coverage last November after he was accused by several players of making a racist comment before a Yorkshire game. He has categorically denied doing so. The claims came as part of the Azim Rafiq racism scandal about prolonged abuse at the club. A report from the Climate Change Committee says ministers' plans for tackling global warming won't deliver on legal targets to cut emissions. Experts are warning there's a shocking gap in the government's efforts to ensure homes are better insulated as energy bills continue to soar. Police in Texas have charged 2 men over the deaths of at least 51 suspected migrants in an abandoned truck near San Antonio on Monday. Officials said bodies had been left strewn from a couple of blocks after the truck's rear door had opened. A third suspect is still in custody. Hello again, everybody. Welcome back to The Breakfast Show. NATO leaders meeting in Madrid this morning in a show of solidarity against Russia. Boris Johnson is expected to tell leaders to dig deep and invest more in defence over the next decade. Earlier, I spoke to our Defence Secretary.
All departmental heads, Kay, will say they want more money. Of course, in the here and now, absolutely, we have enough money. We have enough money for next year as well. You know, what you discover in government, in different departments, is despite getting sums, you've got to then spend them properly. And I've been determined to make sure we are spending our money and getting it out the door. I think what you'll see across a whole range of government departments is that despite settlements, it's often quite hard you can't immediately start building a hospital or immediately start building roads. And that's no different for defence. So look, for the here and now and for that comprehensive spending review settlement, we are absolutely in the right place. Post-2024 is really the discussions I have with the Chancellor and the Prime Minister that I feel, and I said in a speech yesterday, that, the security of this country is vital.
Tomorrow's here. Chancellor, PM, give me more money.
Indeed, while the Prime Minister is in Madrid calling on other countries to spend more on defence like the UK does, here is one of the Prime Minister's key allies in Cabinet using the opportunity to say, no, Prime Minister, you need to spend more at home. Defence got a very generous settlement in the last spending review, which was last year, and it's a 3-year settlement. So for the next 3 years, Defence did better than other government departments. But of course, that was before the Russian invasion of Ukraine at the end of February. And Ben Wallace is now saying to the Prime Minister and Chancellor publicly, from 2024, we need to spend a lot more on defence and you need to get the wheels in motion right now. He suggested that those discussions are already underway. And there is some accusations in newspapers today that Downing Street were taken by surprise by Ben Wallace's call for more money yesterday and the fact that there was a leaked letter over the weekend suggesting he wanted an extra 20%, although in that interview, of course, he denied that to you and said, we're not putting figures on it, but certainly sounds like now public posturing, calling for more money to meet the current threat. And he's supported by Liz Truss, the Foreign Secretary, who said yesterday that we should be spending more as well.
Tomorrow's take at 9 o'clock.
See you then.
Looking forward to it. Now, Joe Biden has said he will continue to look for solutions after the US Supreme Court overturned the right to access an abortion in a history-making decision that has divided opinion across the country. The court's ruling last week overturned the constitutional right to an abortion that has existed for almost 50 years, following a legal case known as Roe v. Wade. We thought we'd talk about it with Scotty and Dr. Shola, and they are with us now. Hello to you both. Thanks for joining us. Scotty, to you first of all. You say abortion activists are raging because they cannot murder babies. You cannot expect decency from those who never had it in the first place. Perhaps you'd like to expand on that for us.
Well, ultimately, Kay, this debate is not necessarily about abortion. Rather, it's about states' rights and our Constitution. In our Constitution, it is written that unless it's specifically noted, the power goes back to the states. And that is literally, in essence, what this ruling was and why the Supreme Court said, listen, you can have an abortion, but that's going to be your state's decision upon it as regarded in our 10th Amendment. So, yes, in one way, this has been the rule of the law for 50 years. That doesn't necessarily make it right. We do not have constitutional rights in the United States to have an abortion. It's never mentioned in our Constitution. And therefore, giving the power back to the state to make the decision is exactly what was right for the Supreme Court to do. This has necessarily no changes. The majority of states will not see any changes with their abortion law because of this. And I just want to remind people, this is only because the Democrats were upset over a case in Mississippi. If they would not have appealed the case in Mississippi, Roe versus Wade on the books would be exactly as is. But they decided to challenge that case, and the Supreme Court took it up for the first time in 50 years, and that is why we are where we are today.
Dr. Shola.
I think that's an outright lie. The bottom line here is that Roe v. Wade and the decision by the Supreme Court and pro-lifers like Scotty is all about subjugating women. It's all about taking the power from women to make decisions over their bodies and over their lives. And please, let's understand this. This has nothing to do with the Democrats. The Republicans have been planning to do this for a long time, which is why Trump put the kind of, the judges and hardcore conservative judges in the Supreme Court. Let us also understand that when we talk about constitutional rights, the purpose of the constitutional right is to confirm the human right that we have as human beings. Abortion rights is healthcare. And if you're not ready to provide all that is necessary for a woman to give birth to a child, if she's decided she doesn't want that child, whether it's due to rape or for whatever other reason, you have no right, none whatsoever, to determine for any woman what decisions she should make over her own life. Now, what the Supreme Court did by passing this on to the states and reversing Roe v. Wade is making women's rights over their own bodies up for political debate. That is an insult. That is disgusting. And I'm surprised that Scotty, as one woman to another, that does not even cause you any concern. But I think that is because what you want is to be able to determine for other women like me what we should do with our bodies, whether we want to have children or not. And the point is, I don't care if you don't want to have an abortion. It should be none of your business whether or not I want to have an abortion or any other woman wants to have an abortion. What's going to be next, Scotty? You tell me. Are we going to now stop, I don't know, interracial marriages? Are you going to penalize people or women who don't want to have children at all? Come on. It's just, it is regressive.
That is pure gaslighting and not even based on the law.
America has gone back to the dark ages. This is nothing to celebrate. It is shameful and disgraceful. And the fact that you've come up here and decided to say, well, actually, women shouldn't have this right. There is no absolute right. It's not a constitutional right. It just tells me, again, that all you're trying to do is you're causing more division amongst us women. And that is part of the problem. The only person this benefits are men.
Well, let Scotty come back on that, please, if you would, please, Dr. Shola. Scotty, your response.
Well, the fact that she says, I don't know what I said that was wrong because everything I said was based on fact. And the reality of it is only 1% of abortions are actually obtained because of rape, 5% because of incest. But the reality of it is last year alone, in 2020, 930,000 abortions happened. The majority of them were second, third, or fourth abortions by women. And we don't have a right to an abortion. We don't have a right to murder here in the United States. You have a right to live. And in my beliefs, my religious beliefs, as well as the majority, including the Muslim faith, the Buddhist faith, majority of faiths also believe that life begins at conception. And here in the U.S., unlike the UK, you can have an abortion up to 26 weeks. In the U.S., you could literally have an abortion in some states all the way up to the moment that the baby could have been born. The baby could have been actually born alive. And in many cases, we are seeing that actually happens sometimes in these horrible clinics, that babies that could have a chance at life were murdered. And that is what we were trying to stop with this. And once again, it's not outlawing abortion. It's just allowing the states to make the decision for themselves. This is actually giving the power to women to be able to live, to have a chance at life. And that is what we celebrate.
I'm sorry. Again, that is a lie. It is taking
What is a lie about it, Shola? What is a lie?
It is taking
specific. What did I lie?
Okay, so it is taking power away from women. It's not giving power to women, particularly women.
It's giving power to a woman to be able to live. 50% of babies are women.
I'm going to respond to you. It is taking power away from women. It is banning abortion. That is absolutely taking power from women. And again, you keep referring to this, the Constitution does not specifically say that you have got a right to abortion. Well, the Constitution did not specifically say that Black Americans have a right to vote. It did not specifically say that Black and white people can get married together. It does not specifically say all of these things.
Hold on, ladies. Thank you. Scotty, we'll come back to you in a second. Dr. Shola.
The point is the Constitution does not give right to Black people. It does not specifically say Black people can vote. It does not specifically say interracial marriages are right. It does not specifically protect the rights of the LGBT community, which is why many people, many marginalized communities have had to fight for this right. So you can't sit there and say, well, because the Constitution doesn't say it, because the founding fathers could not think it, could not conform the thought that, we better write all these things down because people are too dumb enough to figure out actually liberty, life means everybody. That does not mean you get to say that women should be denied the right to make decisions over their own bodies. So my point to you is this. This is taking the power away from women, Black women, working class women who cannot afford alternatives. If you're so concerned about the baby living, why don't you talk about universal health care, universal child care? Why don't you provide for these babies once they're born? But you're not going to do that. The Republican Party is not going to do that because they're a bunch of hypocrites. You want the child to be born, and then you're going to reject and marginalize child, and then as hypocrites, not even lift a finger to feed the child, shelter the child, or cloak the child. So it is between...
I'm going to let Scotty come back there, if I may, please. But I just want to clarify for you, Scotty. Actually, it's 24 weeks of pregnancy here in the UK, but abortions can be carried out after that time if the mother's life's at risk. Go on.
Okay, so here's the thing. It's absolutely pathetic and insulting to all of those who have fought for historical changes. And in the case of racial, gender, all of those, there has been amendments passed. So yes, it is a part of our Constitution. It was actually passed through Congress. That's why this is not a federal right to an abortion. It has never passed. There's not an amendment. Therefore, it goes back to the state. If people care so much about it, pass it through Congress. But even Democrats who hold the House and the Senate refuse to pass it through because they know that is not what the people of the majority of states do not want here in the United States, want to see a federal right to abortion because you are limiting life. And that goes against our the right to a religious stake in it. And it's not about women, of course, it's not telling women that they can't control their own bodies. It's actually giving women a chance at life. This has nothing to do with birth control, infertility treatments, all of those things, all this gaslighting and fear mongering that people like Shola, with all due respect, are trying to sell us and trying to blur the issue, because when it comes down to it, they just don't like the fact that they cannot use abortion as a source of birth control, a source of living, instead of being responsible, where we now, unlike the 1970s when birth control was not readily available, it is readily available in every single community health care across the United States. People of all levels of income can have responsible choices. Like I said, there is always a case in the case of mothers. Obviously, it is that is between a doctor and the family to decide. But people still have the right to life. That is guaranteed by the Constitution, not the right to end it. And there's a big difference between what the UK law is and the US law is. And in this case, it gives the states a chance to make the decisions for their own. You don't like it, go across the state line. California's calling.
Just to clarify, actually, abortion is illegal in the UK, except under certain circumstances. We'll be looking at that with our former Justice Secretary a little bit later on in the programme. But Dr. Shola, to Scotty's point that some women are using abortion as a form of contraception, and that cannot be acceptable.
Right. Who are you to create what the standards are? My point is this: when you place on women this thinking that, well, clearly you are wrong because you're using it as contraception without understanding the totality of their circumstances, you're using a blanket mindset to subjugate women. That right there is wrong. You do not know what the totality of the circumstances of these women are. So I'm saying to you to back the heck off. And let's also understand that using whatever your beliefs and values are to determine that another woman does not come up to par to your standards and beliefs is absolutely wrong, because I don't get to decide for you, Scotty. And look, I do agree. I do not understand why it's taking so long for Roe v. Wade to have been codified into law. It should have been. Why that wasn't done by the Republicans and the Democrats, heaven knows. But the bottom line is that the one source by law, by precedent, that women had as a federal right, and that's how they saw it as, has been taken away from them. Bodily autonomy over a woman's body is not up for political debate. And that is the point. We should not be saying to women that you cannot think for yourself. How dare you have 2, 3, 4 abortions when you do not know what their circumstances are? You're treating women as lesser than less. And you're coming up with all of this so-called Christian values. The Christian values. I mean, as far as I'm aware, the Constitution does not even refer to God. The Constitution is not meant to be merging the church and the state. But all Republicans do is keep on using their so-called Christian values to judge other people. And I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian. And I'm saying to you that as far as I'm concerned, if abortion is a sin, then it is between the woman and God. It's none of your business.
Okay. We must leave it there, ladies. Thank you both very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. We started with you, Scotty, so we must end with Dr. Shola this morning. Thank you both. And just to clarify, abortion in the United Kingdom, 2 doctors must approve the decision to have an abortion, having said that the baby would pose a greater risk to the physical or mental health of the woman than a termination. Talking about that in more detail, as I said, with the former Justice Secretary, Sir Robert Buckland, about 9:30 this morning. Meantime, Ghislaine Maxwell has been sentenced to 20 years in a US prison for helping the deceased financier Jeffrey Epstein abuse young girls. She was convicted in December of recruiting and trafficking 4 teenage girls for sexual abuse. After listening to the statements in court yesterday, in a surprise move, Ghislaine Maxwell stood in her prison clothes and issued a statement to the victims. She said, "To you, all the victims that came today inside the court and outside, I am sorry for the pain you have experienced. I hope my sentence brings you closure, peace and finality. I know my association with Epstein will follow and forever stain me. It is the greatest regret of my life that I ever met Jeffrey Epstein." Some of the victims spoke outside court.
It actually felt very powerful to finally have a chance to speak and have my voice on the record and say the things that I wanted to say about how her crimes had impacted myself and the people that I know and care about.
Yes, Ghislaine must die in prison because I've been in hell and back for the last 17 years.
Joining us now, criminal lawyer and senior trial counsel at Joey Jackson Law, and that's Bernarda Villalona. Hello to you. Thank you for joining us on the programme. What did you make of the sentencing?
I will tell you this, that Ghislaine Maxwell in court, it was a courtroom reckoning what took place with this sentencing and her past trial, one that Jeffrey Epstein never had. This sent a loud message to predators all out there that it doesn't matter how much money you have, doesn't matter where you come from, you are not above the law. Today, these victims got justice. Today, those victims got to voice themselves to the judge who believed them, listened to them, and exercised a just sentence of 20 years for Ghislaine Maxwell. Now she'll probably die in jail.
Just how important was it to have the victims there?
It was very emotional. I can tell you, I actually sat through the victims talking and giving how they felt, how they're affected by Ghislaine Maxwell. I mean, they were in tears. You heard some of these victims says that they tried to kill themselves because of what they went through, that they suffered through depression, that they suffered through alcoholism. That one victim even said to Ghislaine Maxwell, "Look, I met Ghislaine Maxwell just for you to feed me to Jeffrey Epstein." It was horrifying. I mean, you got goosebumps listening to these victims and what they've been through these last couple of years, well, over 20 years since having met Ghislaine Maxwell.
And will other high-profile people associated with the pair now be further investigated, do you think?
I don't think that there's going to be any further prosecutions. I think if there was going to be further prosecution of other people, that it would have happened already. Ghislaine Maxwell, she holds a lot of information, and she did not provide that information to the Department of Justice or the U.S. Attorney's Office. I think if she wanted to provide that information to try to help herself in the sense of a better sentence, she would have done that already. And especially with the passage of time, you got to think with statute of limitations, after a while, you can't prosecute certain individuals because of the passage of time.
Good to talk to you. Thank you very much indeed for joining us on the programme this morning. Thank you.